Bom dia. My name is Randy Melzi, and I'm the Senior Director here at the Americas Society Council of the Americas for Public Policy Programs and Corporate Relations. It is my pleasure to welcome Minister Joaquim Levy for his first public presentation in the United States since taking office on January 1st. Minister Levy, we're very honored to host you here this morning. We're also very pleased to be partnering on this special event with Brain and Ambima, and they are represented by José Carlos Doerchi. And José Carlos, we look forward to working with you again in the very near future. We would like to give a very special welcome to Ambassador Antonio Patriota, Permanent Representative of Brazil to the United Nations, and to the board members of the Americas Society Council of the Americas and our special guests who are here with us today, and also to James Rosenstein, the Executive Director of the BACC. Minister Levy will speak for about an hour, and then he will answer questions. His presentation is on the record, but the questions and answers are off the record, and I would like everybody to please remember to turn your cell phones off. And I thank you again for joining us, and José Carlos, I turn this over to you to introduce Minister Levy.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Melzi. Good morning, everyone. Bom dia a todos. I will make a very brief introduction and introduce Ambima and Brain for you. Most of you may know Ambima and Brain by name, and I'll give just a very short speech here. First of all, on behalf of Ambima and Brain, and on behalf of Ambima's president, Denise Pavarina, I would like to thank our friends from the American Society for all the support and hard work during the last 2 weeks to organize this event. Thank you very much, and we appreciate the partnership and hope to work together again in the future. Ambima, as you probably know, is the Brazilian Financial and Capital Markets Association. We represent more than 300 financial companies in the Brazilian market, mainly investment banks, asset managers, portfolio managers, and investment products distributors around the country. We believe that the Brazilian economy needs the capital markets to grow, and also we believe that it's our mission to find ways to make our market stronger, always stronger. Together with all the market institutions that embrace this mission, Ambima is not the only one, of course, Ambima is confident that a solid and strong capital market will be able to provide the long-term financing that Brazil needs. Brain, I don't know if all of you are familiar with the Brain. Brain is an institution they call Brazil Investment and Business Organization. It's the result of a very successful partnership that a few years ago started with two other entities with Ambima. The BM&F Bovespa, the stock exchange, the commodity exchange in São Paulo, and FEBRABAN, the Brazilian Federation of Banks. Currently, Brain is supported by other representatives of the financial market, financial institutions directly, and is also supported by FEComércio. FEComércio is the federation that represents corporations in the state of São Paulo, corporations especially related with retail business around the state of São Paulo. So Brain is the product of, it's a combination of the real economy and the financial market in Brazil. Brain's mission is to create and develop a favorable and sustainable environment to transform Brazil into an international investment and business hub that will not only benefit Brazil, but the whole Latin America. As you probably know, Brazil and these two associations, ANBIMA and BRAIN, have many challenges ahead, which will require a resilient, persistent, and long-term work. That's our mantra. But we believe and we are very confident in the Brazilian potential. Our confidence, our shared missions, and our willing to face those challenges are the reasons ANBIMA and BRAIN are here today to support this event. To finalize, I hope we have a very productive morning, presentation, questions and answer sections with Mr. Levy. And without no further ado, I thank you all again for being here. And now I would like to call the Brazilian Finance Minister, Mr. Joaquim Levy. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, all of you, for coming. Thank you for hosting us. Once again, this is a very special place for Brazilians, but for everybody in the Americas, both North America and Latin America. And it's a special pleasure to meet some old friends, some new people, and try to share. Well, I think what I really going to try to do this morning is to share our perceptions, our vision, and some of our objectives and what you plan to do. I think that it's very important for the government to have as much as dialogue as possible, to have as much transparency as possible in this particular juncture. The president made some important decisions, decides to make adjustments, and it's important to communicate why and how we're going through them. So, okay, let's start first to really give a very broad view. And I think that we, at this moment, we should also think about the big picture about Brazil. Where is Brazil? What is really relevant about Brazil? We have the short-term concerns, we have things that you have to do immediately, but what's the real story about Brazil? And I think that the first thing to take in mind is the big transformation in the population, in the workforce. We're getting a new generation, a generation that has grown up in a different environment with different stimuli, and that basically is translated in a higher level of education. We doubled the number of people in college. 10 years ago, we would have about 3 million people in college. Now we have 7 million people in college, both private colleges as well as the universities. So the accumulation of human capital has accelerated. And this also goes to lower levels. The big challenge in Brazil is really high school, the final part of high school. And these are the people who are going to feed more and more the colleges. And there is responsibility of the states, but the federal government is also involved, and also trying to increase the supply of training. And this is done with the industry, this is done with the private sector, so that we can gear the type of say, training that's made available to people, to what is required by the economy. And that is also a large program, and I think it can be improved and will be improved, but it's again, a change. And it's very interesting that for many years, for instance, engineering was a career that didn't have that much of a demand. I'm an engineer myself. I like it, and actually have used in many occasions what I learned in school, but I never, for the last 25 years, I never worked systematically as an engineer. Nowadays, it's a good career. And why is that? Because Brazil is growing and there are more things to be done. So I think this education, and in many states, many cities, you get really, a universal education and education where you have access to really the most modern tools to learn. And of course, there are many things to be done. We are far from where we would like to be, but it's a transformation. Brazil it's in many ways a different country, and even things like Bolsa Familia really helped to bring this new generation. You had people that were lifted from really extreme poverty, where you have no contact with the market in general, especially in the countryside, and these people start to have a different experience. These people start to learn skills that will not make them, of course, top in the market, but will contribute to the increase in productivity. This kind of shift from sectors does help to change the human capital and the potential growth of the economy. So this is consolidated and you continue. It puts some burdens in terms of public spending, but it's really worthwhile, and I think there is something that really goes through the whole society. And now the president has chosen a minister that has a long tradition, Minister Cid. He really knows the ropes. He also knows, how to juggle this with budget constraints. So I'm pretty confident that some of the progress that we made will be consolidated, governance will be improved, and you continue in this path. The second thing is that, of course, we've been in a slow patch more recently, and we all resent that growth has slowed down. Maybe last year was even negative because some large investment declined. Overall investment decelerated and actually had even negative growth in some aspects because of some big projects. But I think it's worthwhile to mention that you continue to get a lot of small or medium-sized investments. I particularly picked basically plants, industrial plants. Everybody complains about industry in Brazil. Fact is, and they didn't have time to get more, but if you just look at last year, we would see every month a number of plants. Of course, Brazil is a big country, but the fact is that companies from all over the world continue to build, continue to open plants in Brazil. And this is what you have to ensure that these flows continue, because ultimately that's what provides the diversification of the economic base of Brazil. This is a healthy process. This is a process driven by the private sector and by domestic as well as foreign investors. And I'm going to show you something that I'm sure many of you know. How strong is foreign direct investment in Brazil? Foreign direct invest is reflecting these things. You have there all sorts of plants from glass, from chemical. I think there's even a brewer. So I think this is a very dynamic process, and we have to keep this in mind when you just look at charts or just look at numbers. The reality on the ground is quite important, it's quite diverse. And this is what really, at Finance Ministry, we're looking. You have to provide the confidence for people, an environment that is conducive, that people continue to make this type of decisions. There will be multiple decisions, thousands of people making decisions is what really drives an economy like Brazil. Finally, as this introduction, I have two charts here. They're related now to a big sector, which is driven by a big company. And I'd like to point two things. One is that Petrobras has gone through a transformation period. In the last few years, they really start to change the way they operate and address some of the things, I would say, even weaknesses that have become quite discussed more recently. And we see that, you see, throughout until 2010, you had this increase in production of oil in Petrobras. And then it's kind of stopped. And for 2 years, actually, if you took the yearly average, you would see a slight decline from 2010 to up to 2013. But since last year, I mean, a lot of things that had started, especially after 2012, start to yield results. And also, the pre-sal became a reality. So what you see now is a real pickup in production. This is the chart at the left. I don't know how easy or difficult it is to read it. But we're now back above 2 million barrels a day. And about a third of that comes from pre-sal. So pre-sal is a reality. Pre-sal actually turns out to be more productive than imagined, and this is very important, of course, in an environment where oil prices went down dramatically. But I don't have here, but if you go to any of the presentations of Petrobras, you're going to see a lot of numbers showing that, for instance, the number of wells that you had to drill turned out to be smaller than anticipated. Why? Because most of the wells are much more productive than anticipated. I mean, the fields are more porous, so you can extract from a larger area. They are actually deeper than thought. So, and the quality is also extremely good. So it's a good story. And also now they are finalizing all the connection of the pipeline, so they're going to start to send the gas. Most of the gas produced had been re-injected, also helps to increase the production of oil. But now they're completing the connection in the seabed, and it's this gas from the pre-sal we also start to get. Well, it'll be in São Paulo, but it's fine. Although I'm from Rio, I think it's fair. They deserve to get something out of these fields, although most of them are still in Rio. And so I think this is important. This shows that, at least in the production side, the company has found its ways. And I think now, in a broader sense, it's really completing this turnover. I'm very confident that they're going to overcome all the hurdles about their accounts. I mean, they're being through a very unusual situation, and the main problem is not that the company is not doing the adequate disclosure. It's simply that there are no general accepted principle to record this in the books. So the independent auditor is trying to find out ways to do that, and they've been talking with regulators both in Brazil as well as in the U.S. to find a way where you could, in the most truthful way, reflect whatever findings they have. So I think that they are very much focused on getting all the accounts audited and turn this page, and I believe they'll be able to do that in the next couple of months, not only the third quarter that we all have followed the saga, but also the annual accounts with all the revaluation that might be necessary. In this point, I think I put this other chart here to bring to the attention that actually, in spite of all the problems we may have, there's nothing really new about some of these expenditures. This chart is taken from all the presentation from Petrobras, and what is most remarkable there is that you have the two dotted lines. The first dotted line is the investment in oil production. the EP, okay, exploration and production, and with upstream. And you see that it has increased quite dramatically in the last few years, okay? But then it's even more remarkable, the red dot line. And these are, this is what's called the downstream, it's refining and so on, which is what has been discussed in some of the reports and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the numbers were there. Supposedly the market would be able to evaluate if this was good money, bad money, well spent or not. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that throughout the years, Petrobras has always disclosed all the expenditure, and you get in many places and exactly where this money was spent. So there is no real surprise to the market. All of this was made available to analysts throughout the world. So whatever you may find at the margin that were other problems, I mean, everything was very much public. And if you go to some other documents, you'd have these plant by plant. There's no surprise. The market knew what's going on, knew where you're spending the money, what you'd expect to do, and the difficulties in getting some things completed. But in no time, the market was left without knowing what was happening in the company. I think this is very important because, as with other areas in Brazil, the level of disclosure is, I think, quite unique and follow very high standards. We may have trouble in any business, in any area, but the disclosure, the numbers are available to market, to analysts, and people really strive to share what they know. Well, one thing that also was shared was the clear slippage in fiscal numbers, and this slippage had some consequences. So in the last few years, and in particular in 2014, we saw this slippage. And this is the slippage that the government now wants to correct. Again, in spite of some treatment at some point in time, I think that one of the reasons why this was so much discussed, I mean, there are two big reasons for that. One is because everything, what you see is what you get. So whatever, say, change or adjustment was actually very transparent to the market. And also, of course, in Brazil, you have a very free press. So people could air the discomfort or questions or whatever. And also independence of say those who publish these numbers, starting with the central bank. When we started, myself and Nelson Barbosa, we made very clear that we would uphold even higher standards of transparency and disclosure in all the fiscal numbers. And for a very simple reason, I think this is something that is very important, very valuable to Brazil. We got used to have this disclosure. The market works on this level of trust, and this is helpful. It's helpful for the decision maker in the government as well as decision makers in the market. So after we started, we had the central bank coming out with a very, very startling number, maybe, of the primary result of 2006. And here it doesn't show, but it's the first time since the 90s that we had a deficit. And but even before that, the president had made a commitment that would turn around and have a goal to have a surplus of 1.2% of GDP for the general, let's call it general government. Today it's basically, this is less than in the past, but it's in the right direction. And our aim, of course, is to stabilize the gross debt, fixing the amount of reserves that we have. And this is what we are working to achieve in the next 10 months. That's the commitment of the President. That is our responsibility, both at the Planejamento as well as at Fazenda. And we have already taken some measures. We're going to take other measures, and we are going to discuss them. In the case we need to discuss them at Congress. And I think I'm very confident that we're going to get the adequate level of support from Congress. These are no partisan issues. Everybody understands the importance of Brazil to get back in the track where you have your public debt on a favorable trajectory. So I'm confident that, of course, any legislation can be improved, and this is why you have Congress, you have discussions, but the gist of it, the thrust of this, will be maintained, because you do need to reverse this fiscal scenario. Of course, again, Brazil, when you talk about gross debt, in contrast with most countries, our gross debt is actually backed by assets. In many countries, you have reserves that are monetized. In Brazil, for a number of reasons, they are not monetized. This is one reason why, for instance, some countries you measure reserves against M2 and so on and so forth. In the case of Brazil, 1/4 of our gross debt is actually backed by international reserves. Okay, this is backed by another debt, which happens to be the US debt. But I mean, it's as good as one may want to be. And this is one reason why for many years people have focused on the net debt instead of the gross debt. This is important when you compare gross debt with other countries where you have nothing on the other side of the balance sheet. Even what is lent to public banks, again, you do have projects and real, say, income streams on the other side of the gross debt. So about 10% of GDP, which is about 1/6 of the total debt, is backed by loans to the biggest companies, not only in Brazil, but in the world. I mean, Volkswagen likes BNDES, InBev likes BNDES, you name it. Everybody in the world likes BNDES for whatever reason. So these are the assets that are on the other side of the balance sheet of the public debt. I mean, you can make an evaluation about how much this is worth. I mean, again, you can judge how much it's worth the U.S. Treasury bonds. You can make evaluation how much it's worth some of the debts against companies and so on. But the fact is that, one, the gross debt has increased more recently, but it's not to say that we are really in a rampant surge. And part of this increase has been related to the accumulation of assets. I'm not pretending that we should not worry about the fiscal situation in Brazil. We should be cautious. We pay a very large interest bill, and there are reasons for that. But we also have to keep in mind what is the real contour of our fiscal stance. And actually, this is very hard to see, but it shows that if you take from 2007 from now, actually in many countries we have seen higher increase in debt, percentage increase in debt, than in Brazil, let alone the large countries that have been running large deficits. But even among our peers, some have reduced it. Peru has reduced dramatically. Others have been so-so. I mean, South Africa has increased, Russia has increased. We don't want to go in this path. But again, puts somewhat in context where you are. Even if you see the BB medium, okay, which is well, it's not the average, but you know what it is. You see that there has been a slight increase compared with what we saw in Brazil, in part because the years immediately after the financial crisis, people run large deficits than Brazil. Now, of course, I mentioned BNDES, and I mentioned that part of the debt was generated by providing funds to BNDES. I think this has run its course. It has a reason, maybe in the aftermath of 2008, but right now we don't expect to continue that. So the blue bar there should stabilize. That's our objective. And I think that BNDES is using a lot of imagination, which is good, to find ways to leverage its balance sheet, to bring more people to work with them, to partner with capital markets, to partner with financial institutions so that you get more balanced financing of companies and of projects in Brazil. BNDES will continue to play an important role, but I think more and more is going to have also the participation of other agents in the market. Of course, for that, again, you have to provide conducive environment. And this is why to commit to fiscal targets is so important, because ultimately the duality that we have in the Brazilian credit market is due to lingering doubts about the fiscal. That's why you have market rates that are so far from, say, year market rates and so on. And more important, that's why often, until recently, we didn't have long-term credit. Although this has changed. I mean, in the last few years, we saw more and more in the domestic market people willing to buy, for instance, bonds with maturity of 5, 7, 10 years. This is a very important change in the domestic financial market in Brazil, and José Carlos mentioned the role of the capital markets in Brazil. And I think that if we continue to have a robust fiscal outlook, this market will continue to develop, and I think that more and more people will be willing to buy long-term bonds. This is again, it's something that I have seen from 2005 onwards, and I think will continue. That's a natural path for Brazil. Now, when I was discussing the slippages, I think there are two sources of that for the, let's call, deterioration or weakening of the fiscal stance. One was that Brazil was one of the few countries in the world that in the period after 2008 has cut taxes. In most countries, starting with the UK, you raise taxes. And in Brazil, we cut. Maybe we didn't cut in the best possible way. There are many considerations one could make. But the fact is that we cut taxes. If you look here at the impact, again, in Brazil, these things are disclosed every year. Of course, that makes the whole issue a little bit boring, because you're not going to read the annex to LDO to see all the tax expenditure that we have in Brazil. But the fact is that for the last 12, 14 years, every year we publish estimations of tax expenditure. And I think few countries in the world do that. Well, if you look at that, tax expenditure and tax breaks, you see that they doubled. And they jumped to about 2% of GDP. So 1% of the reduction in the primary surplus is largely due to these tax reductions. And the main thing we can say about that is that they have, their role, the role of this tax reductions, to a large extent has fission. They are a rolling back of some of these tax breaks is kind of overdue. And actually you have already taken some of these. I mean, you take the case of the CIG, the petrol tax. It was cut to zero. In the past, it was about 0.28 cents per liter. I don't know how much does it make for a gallon, but whatever. Multiply this by 4, 3 by 4, I don't know, £1 per gallon. Okay, which this was many years ago. If you bring this adjust for inflation, you'll be almost like 50 or 60 cents per liter. We have raised the city from 0 to 22 cents, okay, in the case of gasoline, and to 15 the diesel oil. We're just rolling back something that was meant to be an anti-cyclical support. And I think the big realization in Brazil and in the government is that we have to move beyond the anti-cyclical. The world is changing. Many countries are withdrawing their anti-cyclical policies. Here in the US, fiscal policy has been more restrictive for the last 2 or 3 years. Many people complain about that, but the reality is that it has been like this. Monetary policy, sooner or later, will also become more restrictive. You already had the tapering in the purchase of bonds. And you have in China also very carefully rolling back some of their anti-cyclical policies. And these two policies had a tremendous impact in Brazil. The policy from the US basically meant that you had a lot of capital flows, we had a lot of pressure in the exchange rate because it was mainly monetary. And in the case of China, they had a tremendous impact on commodity prices. So, you know what's happening to commodity prices, and it's not happening for no reason. It's happening because little by little, also China is taking away their anti-cyclical policy carefully, because there is all this concern about financial markets there and so on and so forth, but that's the reality. So it's very natural that if our two main partners are moving away from anti-cyclical policies, you better do the same. So in large part what we're doing is the realization that we are entering a new phase of the post-2008. And you have to be in sync with this new phase. And this is why it's so important for us to go back and strengthen our fiscal, because this is what's happening elsewhere too. And you better be in sync with our main partners. So we're not inventing new taxes so far. We're basically rolling back some of the things that are anti-cyclical. And not really by magic, but surprise, surprise, it will help our fiscal stance. And of course, these were taxes that always existed. We're not creating new burdens to the private sector. This is not going to dampen growth forever or anything like this. We're just coming back to the normal thing. Actually, we would like to cut taxes in a more permanent way, maybe in a more horizontal way. Well, this is another game. And actually what we're going to do from the beginning, and this is planned for the next few months, is to simplify some taxes, and in particular to revamp the fiscal fees. I don't want to get into all the details about fiscal fees, but this is a VAT, and to get the credit in the VAT mechanism is very complicated. So we want to simplify that, which will bring a host of benefits, including for exporters. Because right now, if you export, you get the credit and you don't know what to do with the credit. With the new mechanism, it will be much easier for exporters. So that's what we want to do. And they do not, the way we intend to do, we will not reduce our revenues, but we'll make life easier for companies. So basically we are just taking these anti-cyclical measures away, and this will put us in a better footing in terms of revenue. That can be done without too much pain. Expenditure. Well, again, here is good. I'm sorry that I'm going to some basics. I know that many of you know all of that, but there's such a diverse group here that it's good to make some key points. One is an observation that actually payroll expenditure, so the payment to public employees, including the retired public employees has decreased as a share of GDP. So this, of course, is rigid, mandatory expenditure, but the fact is that if you look at the last a few years, actually for the last decade, it has been in a declining path. And one reason is why is because we had some agreements, multi-year agreements with the public servants, and this helped to moderate wage increases. So, and also there is no big hiring or anything like this. So, mind you, you're talking about a country that went through a big boom, commodity booms, great years, and so on. But actually, especially at the federal level, the number of public employees didn't boom. Okay? There is discipline there. I mean, Brazil is not perfect, but let's also think about what you have achieved, because ultimately that's what gives the strength to the economy and confidence to people in the private sector. So discipline there. Other expenditures that include some discretionary spending, you see that in the last few years there was a sharp increase. Of course, these will have to be moderated. These will be part of what we are addressing in the cuts. We don't have the budget yet, but we've been keeping some leads on the expenditure. And of course, as soon as you get the budget approved, you go through the ritual that all of you know about the contingenciamento and so on and so forth, so that you're sure that you have you can achieve the target. Okay, and you see there natural candidates, because in the last couple of years there was an increase in these largely discretionary expenditures. There is room to cut. I tell you something. If you go back, in many cases, if you go back to the level of spending of just 2 years ago, 2013, which was a great year, a year where, I mean, people were happy and we were doing a lot of things, you can achieve, you can get to the track of the 1.2% target without much trouble. So you just have to turn the clock a little bit back, and you don't have to make, say, draconian cuts or anything like this, okay? Just, if you take away 2014, which was an exceptional year, where you saw there was this big plunge on the primary and so on, go back to 2013. If you manage to do that, we will do most of what is necessary to get to the target. And 2013 was a fat year in many ways. Okay. Now there are some challenges, of course, in some of the transfers, notably Social Security, and this was driven in the last few years mostly because of the increase of minimum wage. And the minimum wage, there was its own dynamics, which was related to the growth of the economy and so on and so forth. I'm sure that many of you know. So without changing anything, we're going to see a moderation in the growth of Social Security spending. In Brazil, for those who might not be completely familiar with that, you have a floor on all the transfers and all the benefits of Social Security, which is the minimum wage. So if the minimum wage has a real increase of 4, 5, 6%, like some years we had years where the increase was of 6%, real, okay? I think that in the US it will take a decade to get 6% increase, real increase in minimum wage. We got in 1 year. Of course, this has an impact on Social Security. But because the increase is tied to GDP growth with a lag, and the last couple of years we had a slower growth, we're going to see also a more moderate increase in Social Security transfers. So we have to watch, yes, but the dynamics will be more favorable going forward. Okay, so these are the three main pieces of the budget, and we see we'll of course strive to continue to have discipline with payroll. We'll have to look at the discretionary to see where we can make adjustment without being necessarily too drastic. And of course, we have the transfers. Now, in the transfers, we're not idle, okay? Let me move here. the government has taken very serious and focused steps to address some of these transfers. In any country, this will be called structural adjustments, and they are structural adjustments. Some, for instance, the case of pensions, widowed pensions, they are important. They will not yield all the results in first year. They will build up these results over time, but they are very focused and very effective. And people understand. They are just addressing some, we could call loopholes or excess in the legislation. In a few countries, the widow will get a full pension. And even fewer countries, you get a full pension for life if you're a young widow, man or woman. So you're making this adjustment. Of course, it protects. If you have children, you'll be fully protected. But after the children grow up and so on, if you're still relatively young person, well, you're supposed to also continue to contribute to Social Security. So these are adjustments that are clearly perceived as addressing very specific situations that are very expensive, but are not in any way harming the rights of workers or families, whatever. The same thing in the disease-related benefits. Again, some adjustments. You basically say, okay, you want to get some benefits of Social Security. Let's check if you have contributed for Social Security. Let's be sure that there's no way to arbitrage on that and play around. That's basically what we've done. But this will provide significant savings, okay? And again, and the unemployment benefits at the margin, things that are very clear, and I think that these are important things. Some of them will actually help to address one of the problems of the economy, which has been actually the labor supply has slowed down in the last few years. I think this may help to increase labor supply. So this is good for the economy. Let me do something a little bit sentimental here, but this is say a slide that I used to present many years ago when I was at the Treasury. And the message was very simple. This was when the commodities boom started, and things start to look so much easier, okay? And we knew that. And I think that the message that was there is in Portuguese, but I presume many of you can read, that, okay, we realize that things are favorable, and what we're going to do is to use wisely these opportunities. And that's was said in 2005, and I think to a large extent that was the reality. We did not waste, we did not squander the commodity booms. Like I showed at the beginning, most of these was used to increase education, to transform society, even to do investments, and also to keep, I mean, we kept the discipline in public employment. We kept the discipline in many ways. And again, as soon as we felt that there were some risk, the government took the decision to address this risk. We did not wait to really have a serious problem. And that, I think, that should be recognized. Let me move forward. I mentioned before one thing, current account. Current account has, the deficit has increased in the last few years. But we have to realize, again, that when you look at the numbers in Brazil, you have to think a little bit beyond the say, overhead numbers. Because in Brazil, for many years, we had a very strong flow of foreign direct investment. And actually, in the last few years, a large part of our current account has comprised remittances, profits remitted by many companies to their headquarters. I mean, for a number of banks and automakers and so on, the activities in Brazil have been absolutely fundamental to their profitability. Okay, and so what you have seen in many cases that you have a current account, a flow that is compensated by capital flows, investments, in a way that when you subtract the current account to the FDI flow, who had been very stable, and it continued stable, even after the slowdown. Of course, maybe some of the enthusiasm of some investors may be dampened somewhat, but still, it's a quite comfortable balance between the outflows from the current account and the inflows. Actually, if you look at number of countries, you'd see that this balance in the case of Brazil, we're almost in balance, okay? It's very different than even India. India will improve this year because of the oil prices, but until recently, they have a deficit. When you subtract the current account deficit and you also incorporate the FDI, still they had a deficit of 2.8. Indonesia, 1.2. South Africa, I mean, many times over Brazil. So when you consider the two sides, it's a little bit like with the debt. When you consider the whole picture, actually it's not as bad as would appear. We can do better, but it's not as bad. And you see, a Brazilian share of world's FDI has almost doubled in the last few years. That's a strong economy. We have to strive to continue to be a strong economy. But this is a strong economy. And another area where the same kind of thing happens is in infrastructure. We all in Brazil want much more infrastructure, but we have to keep in mind two things. One is, in the last 20, 25 years, the participation of the private sector in the operation, in the construction infrastructure in Brazil has been very successful. From ports to energy, to telecom, to roads, it's something that has been quite successful. And moreover, as many people say, in Brazil sometimes it takes time to get something done, but after it's done, it's very seldom we're going to have a step back. So you've seen that, for instance, concessions, they've been supported by several governments. I mean, it started at Itamar. You had, of course, the big increase at Fernando Henrique, but Lula also continued, and Dilma also continued. There are things that you have to adjust, especially as you want to have more private financing and less reliance on BNDES. And the government is ready to do that. And I think it's a great opportunity not only for Brazilians. I think that the private investment in infrastructure has a tremendous social impact. Of course, there is a social impact in the place where the infrastructure is built, but also increasingly has a social impact for those who send their money, their savings, to finance that, because this provides a steady and significant stream of resources for savers, for instance, in Europe and in other developed countries. So I think we have to work, and I see here faces of many people who have helped us from investment banks and others, who have to work to get the instruments to finance that right. And I think this is achievable. I think with the level of trust that financial markets have in Brazil, we can do, when you can make a jump in the amount of infrastructure that's financed by the private sector. I mean, you can say many things about the last few years in Brazil, but the fact is that you did get a number of concessions in roads, in oil, in airports, in energy. We need to do more, but Brazil did. And I think that when you look at what was actually done, it's more than most countries in the world, because infrastructure is not easy to finance. So if you look, infrastructure financed by the private sector, concessions, for instance, and you compare with Mexico, you compare with Turkey, you compare with a number of countries, you're going to see that at the end of the day, even with all the problems that we have faced in the last few years, Brazil stands in a quite good position, in part because we're big, in part because we had a number of projects really being made. One case is electricity. I talk very briefly here. You see that we have seen a growth In spite of every problem, we have seen growth in the amount of, say, potential built around 4% a year. That's quite significant, except for one reason, of course, which is that demand has also increased quite sharply, and especially residential demand and demand in the service sector. There's a lot of numbers here, it's difficult to see, but if you look at the table at the bottom, you're going to see that 2014, the consumption of energy, mind you, the consumption of energy by households this year is 23%, almost to a quarter larger than just 4 years ago. 5 years if you want, okay? So mind you, this is a country where consumption of energy by households increased by 25% in just 5 years. That's extremely significant. In most countries, actually has reduced, okay? Which also means that you have some cushion there. I mean, with a little bit of effort and savings, you can stabilize somewhat this consumption, which is important in odd years where you have less supply of, say, energy. We don't have to go to very radical situation if you can adjust just some parts of the consumption, which has grown quite significantly in the last few years. And I didn't put the chart here, but again, this year, through solar, through wind, to even water in the north and other things, we're going to get another 4% of new energy on stream. So in spite of everything, the supply of energy continues to grow in Brazil. Let's go back very quickly on that, on those local currency project bonds, the famous debêntures de infraestrutura. Okay, this shows that they're still incipient, but it also shows that there is a large demand for long term. You see, many of them are, well, there is some mode at 5 and then some at 10 and 12 years. Okay, this instrument has to be refined, but I think it can provide a very interesting investment opportunity. It can become a sort of a, say, asset class on its own, and I think that similar instruments could also develop in other countries. There is an effort in many countries, and IMF, G20, and so on, to try to harmonize these instruments so that people can really compare and can benchmark them so that they really become an asset class. And I think that this would be extremely valuable, like I mentioned, not only for the countries that you do the infrastructure, but also as a new asset class for savers. Okay, here it shows the typical return compared with our NTN-B, and I think in the next chart shows why this comparison is important. I mean, I have here some friends that were very active when 10 years ago we opened up the market for the NTN-B to foreign investors, and nowadays, because of this, if you look at the right side, you see that about 18% of the public debt in Brazil is held by foreigners, but it is domestic public debt. The foreign debt of Brazil is ridiculously small comparing with either GDP or export, whatever. The foreign debt now is a very small fraction. And this is very good because, of course, reduces the risk of, the currency risk and so on and so forth. But we have a large share in very long-term debt, usually 2040, even 2050, of public debt. Now, already in this tiny market of the debentures, the project bonds, you see the green thing there, the non-residentials. It's already an interesting share. This share can increase, and the whole volume can increase. So I think, together with other structures, this can help finance infrastructure in Brazil. And actually, BNDES has worked on that, and I think more and more you'll be a partner to develop this market. And I think it can be, to the extent that many these instruments are usually linked to inflation, it means that in the long run, the exchange rate risk is very much reduced because, of course, you're talking only about real interest rates, and over time, especially given the kind of spread they have, over time, the kind of say, gap that you could get in the value of the bonds because of the real exchange rate is much smaller than if these were nominal bonds. So we're mentioning that because I think these and other instruments would be integral part of the new drive to come up with new concessions and to continue to invest in infrastructure in Brazil. And of course, as we see the interest rate, there was some increase more recently, but the interest rate continues its path of, say, historical decline. Here I show the real, but also the nominal interest rate shows a historical decline. We are now, of course, in a tightening period, but I'm sure the cycle has been much smaller than in the past. These instruments, long-term instruments, will be more and more interesting. Also, I think as a consequence of the initial measures we have taken and the commitment to strengthen the fiscal policy, we already see for the first time for some period, we see that the inflation expectations are back converging to closer to, say, the 4.5%. In recent years, this was less clear, but in the last few months, we start to see this convergence. Of course, 2015, we have some once-off effects as you realign some prices, but the trust of the market is that with the fiscal policy and the vigilance of the monetary policy, we are going towards a declining level of inflation. So you see that in the outward years, we are getting already at 5%, which is, of course, much closer to the 4.5 target than inflation has been the last couple of years. And this is extremely, extremely important. Final thought, you see that the long-term bonds, the yield curve is still not so much that is that much steep, but the fact, as I mentioned, that historically interest rates are coming down, it means that, of course, if you have a long-term paper, okay, your final yield will be higher than the short term. So if you really, and this is our obligation, if the market really sees that we're converging and that the interest rates will be able to come down because also the fiscal is very strong, it means that, of course, the capital gains in long-term paper could be quite substantial. And again, this is very good for financing projects and so on and so forth. Well, again, a little bit of a memory lane. When we were preparing that, some people from the Treasury got some very old presentations. Some of you have been, subject to these in past years. But this was back in 2003 when we first, at the beginning of the Lula government. I think actually we presented this one time when at the time Minister Rousseff also came to the US and we had some presentation. And you have this very simplified story there where, well, the three pillars for what Lula's government want to do. And I think that by and large, Brazil has abided to that. I mean, fiscal and monetary responsibility, effective and affordable social security network, both a familia and this kind of things, and entrepreneurship. I mean, in the last 10 years, we have seen a tremendous transformation of the economic landscape in Brazil. I mean, formalization, the growth of the formal labor force. I mean, we got 15 million jobs in the last 12 years. And also, we get tax compliance increasing and so on and so forth. Now, if you update these a little bit, the main pillars are the same. Of course, what you have to do is slightly different, but the objectives and say the main thrust of what the Brazilian government is up to is the same. So now when you talk about the fiscal monetary responsibility, okay, we're talking about convergence to the inflation target, of course, but also we're shifting the focus also a bit more to the gross debt. Of course, like you showed, the net debt is very relevant, but we can do more. So you're focusing on gross debt. We're tightening a little bit things. We also committed to accelerate concessions and PPP opportunities. Why? Because you want investment to continue to grow, but you cannot burden the budget. So that's the way this reflected. The same thing about the social aspects. I started mentioning education, and education will be a key point of the government. And finally, the entrepreneurship, making life easier for the private sector, for those who are really want to have new endeavors in the economy. There, very objectively, we are planning to make changes at the federal VAT. We're also trying to facilitate some changes in the state VAT. This something has to be decided by the states themselves and by the Senate, but we at Fazenda, we're ready to help them. And the expansion of Simples, many of you know what Simples is, and also commitment of reducing bureaucracy, of making this doing business agenda. I think it's very important at this stage, and you have Minister Afifi, among others, very much committed to do that. And finally, in international trade, maybe some of you have met Minister Armando. He's a great leader. He has a clear sense of what are the budget restrictions. So he's really trying to innovate in this agenda of the industry and of trade, and really thinking outside the box. So I think that it's a team that is really very much attuned to the same objectives and very mindful of the same constraints. And I'm confident that 2015 will be a year of some challenges, but like I mentioned, yes, we can get to the target that the president has committed to, and we have to work so that 2016 is a year of growth and a year of optimism and things, not the least because, as all of you know, 2016 will be a very important year to Brazil, the year when you're going to host the Olympics. And I have to tell you, the preparations for the Olympics are doing well. They're, I'd say, on target, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of budget. There's a lot of commitment. The federal government is supporting it. Of course, the local authorities are supporting it. And I think that you'll be a very good, you help this mood after we go over the adjustment that you have to do right now, and you really set the foundations for a new cycle of growth. It'll be a different type of growth because the commodity cycle is over, but that's not a problem. Brazil has so many resources, such a large private sector that I'm absolutely confident that if you get the house in order, the private sector will find new opportunities, new markets, and we're going to get back to a path of growth. And this is essential. We have to continue to produce jobs. Like I mentioned, we have a new generation coming. It's a generation that has new expectations, also has new skills, and I'm very confident that as long as we provide the basic assurance of a stable fiscal, a stable macroeconomic framework, people will do what they have to do, business will do what they have to do, and I think the investment opportunities will be many, and I'm sure that including given the institutional quality of Brazil, foreign investors will continue to come, both for portfolio as well as for indirect investment. Thank you very much.